place for us to start understanding the whole story of Lilith is at the beginning, Genesis. In the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, we already find an initial story of how humans came to be. The first humans, according to the text, is Lorem. God made all creation in 6 days. On the first, he separated light from darkness. On the second, separated the waters below from the waters above. In the third, he separated the lower waters and made room for dry land and created vegetation. In the fourth, he filled light and darkness with stars. On the fifth day, he filled the waters and the sky with aquatic and flying animals. And on the sixth day, he populated the dry land with the land animals and the forest animals, humans. And about this last act, the creation of humans, the text says the following: God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him.
Did he create male and female, or male and female?
Yeah. Created. All of this is present right there in the first chapter of the Bible. But in the next chapter, Genesis 2, the creation story starts again. And the sequence of events is slightly different. The text says the following: In the time when God made the earth and the heaven, there were no shrubs of the field upon the earth yet, and no herb of the fields had yet grown, because Yahweh God had not sent rain upon the earth. And there was no man to till the ground. However, a spring rose from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. Then Yahweh God shaped man from the clay of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And here, this man is just a man indeed, masculine. After that, Yahweh planted the Garden of Eden and shaped from the ground the other animals, as he had done with the former. Man, but
Text says the man didn't find.
brought among these animals no helpers that corresponded to him. And then God made man sleep, took a part of him and created woman. And then the man woke up and said, "This indeed is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." And the story goes on from there. Now what does all this have to do with Lily? Since antiquity, many interpreters of the Bible have been quite intrigued with the contrast between these two creation stories. In an older video I made here on the channel, I even commented on the Platonic interpretation that Philo of Alexandria, in the 1st century, he tries to harmonize these two stories. But the point of contrast that interests us most here for this video, it's just that in the first story, the man and the woman seem to be created almost at the same time. He created man and woman, but in the second story, man is clearly created well before the woman, who, by the way, is created from his body. This indeed is the apple of my eye, and flesh of my flesh. And to resolve this apparent contradiction, while at the same time preserving the most direct and literal reading of both texts, some readers from ancient times understood that these passages did not exactly talk about the same people. The second story definitely spoke of Adam and Eve. After all, these names are explicitly mentioned in the narrative that follows. But in the first story, the man and the woman are not named, which allowed some readers to interpret that this passage spoke of the creation of Adam, of another woman, his first wife, a woman who was not flesh of his flesh and bone of his bones, a woman named Lydia. But then another problem arises. Who is Lilith? Where did these voters come up with this character? Does the name Lilith, by any chance, even appear at any point in the Bible? So, worse than it appears, but in another book, which is the book of Isaiah. In chapter 34 of Isaiah, there is a prophecy against the kingdom of Edom that goes as follows. The next, there will be no nobles to proclaim kingship, their princes will vanish, thorns will grow in their palaces, lichens and thistles in their strongholds. She, the land of Edom, will become a dwelling for jackals, a home for ostriches, meaning the kingdom of Edom would be reduced to ruins and desert. Instead of kings and palaces, the scenery would be taken over by wild animals, and in that same spirit, the text continues as follows. Wild cats will coexist there with hyenas, and satyrs will call out to their fellows. Lilith will rest and find a place for herself. Ali, rest.
To Lilith, which is the only
This
correct
is the occurrence
one.
of this word in the Bible, and if you search in other Portuguese Bibles, you might not find it, because many translations replace the term Lilith with other things, like for example nocturnal animals, nocturnal creatures. There's an owl, the desert witch, but the Hebrew is there. Interestingly, even in ancient translations, this term varied a lot. The Septuagint, for example, which is a Greek translation from before Christ, translated Lilith as Onokentor, a type of half-man, half-goat centaur. And the Vulgate, which is a Latin translation from the 4th century AD, turned Lilith into Lamia. a seductive creature and baby eater from Greco-Roman mythology. And so, as strange as it may seem, this last translation, that of the Vulgate, probably does not stray far from being a translation.
Feel the pain?
Originally from the passage, no. The characteristics most associated with Lilith in other sources that we will analyze shortly are precisely seduction and attacking babies. But the original myth of Lilith that's behind Isaiah's Lilith and Adam's wife, Lilith, doesn't come from Greece or Rome, but from Mesopotamia, and that's where we're heading now, to understand what was said about Lilith even before the Bible was written. And then we'll go back to see how this was appropriated by Jewish translations. Well, the word Lilith appears in Mesopotamian texts since the 3rd millennium before Christ. In the language of ancient Arcadia, the term is limit, and it also has a male form, Lilo. And both terms refer to desert spirits or monsters responsible for causing a series of evils ranging from fever and delirium until death. A list of Sumerian kings from around 2400 before Christ. It is said that the fearsome Sumerian king Gilgamesh was the son of a Lilo, and the poem Gilgamesh and the Ulupu tree from about 2000 years before Christ tells a story where Gilgamesh faces a Lilith, probably a variant of Lilith, that had taken possession there of a tree that belonged to the goddess Inanna. According to that story, Inanna, or Ishtar, there was a tree that had been planted since the days of creation, and that she took care of it, hoping the tree would grow, to make a throne out of its wood. But as the tree grew, a dragon ended up making a nest at the base of the tree, leaving the tree without a throne. A giant bird made a nest at the top, and a lily made a house in the middle of the trunk. At a certain point, King Gilgamesh, to please Inanna, went to the tree and killed the dragon with an axe blow. And then the giant bird was startled and flew to the mountains, and Lilith fled in desperation, ending up in the desert where she then made her home. Besides this more narrative type of text, we also find several records of the name Lilith in amulets and other objects used to ward off evil spirits. An interesting artifact is a Phoenician or Canaanite tablet that
says the following:
a flying kick in the dark room. Uro, leave at once, O Lily. These words appear alongside various other spells that were used for protection,
the moment of
giving birth, and thus preventing evil spirits from causing the death of the baby or child from the mother. It's interesting that this object brings a visual representation of a lily, appearing as a kind of winged sphinx. Another possible depiction of a Lilith is this terracotta relief known as the Burning Relief, or the relief of the Queen of the Night found in the south of Iraq in 1924. More data from almost 4,000 years before that. It also features a winged figure with the feet of some bird, and this figure is accompanied by creatures of the night, such as owls and lions, but it's unclear if this relief represents a Lilith, or if it represents some goddess like the goddess Ishtar, or like Ereshkigal, who is the queen of the underworld. These three possibilities are the main ones considered today by those who studies this topic. But anyway, the fact is that limit, or limits in general, were very present in the imagination of ancient Mesopotamia, and consequently became very present in the imagination of cultures that lived near that region, as is the case with Jews, like the desert creature, but so far nothing in the theme of Lilith, Adam's wife. So let's, for this, the oldest text we have, which actually develops the idea that Adam was married to a Lilith, or that he was even married to Lilith with a unique figure, is a medieval Jewish text called Alphabet of Ben Sira. According to this text, in the beginning, God created both man and woman from the sun. Adam and the woman was Lilith, but the two of them, right there at the beginning of creation, immediately started to argue. Even during sexual moments, they argued, and here I quote the text. She, Lilith, said, "I will not be outdone," and he, Adam, said, "I won't be on the bottom, but on top, since you're meant to be on the bottom and I'm to be on top. So it is," he said to Adam, "we are both the same, since we both came from the earth. But like no other, neither Lilith nor Adam gave in on this point." Lilith, at some point, ends up pronouncing for some reason the sacred name of God, flies through the air and ends up in the Red Sea, where she joins several evil spirits, and as a series he has thousands of sons. and Adam, then abandoned, starts to cry out to God, saying that his wife had go.
Video.
And then God sends 3 angels to bring her back. The angels Sanoi, Sansenoi, and Samangeloth. And these angels then reach Lilith and tell her the following: either you return to Adam, or 100 of his children will die each day. But Lilith refuses to return, and the angels then threaten to drown Lilith herself in the Red Sea.
Go ahead, right?
Regarding this threat, she says the following, and here I quote once more from the alphabet of Ben Sira: "Get out of here. I was created only to cause diseases in babies. The boy has dominion over it for 8 days after birth."
What's the time before the circumcision, right?
And if it's a girl, for 20 days. But even after that declaration, the angels keep insisting she return to Adam, and then she makes at last an oath, saying that she would then accept having 100 lost children per day, and that whenever she saw the 3 angels, or she saw the names of the 3 angels, she would refrain from doing harm to anyone. Baby. And then the text finally concludes with the following words: "For that reason every day 100 demons perish, and for the same reason we write the
names of
angels in little children's amulets." When Lilith sees these names, she remembers her oath, and the child is safe. In other words, this whole story served to explain, among many other things, right, the Jewish custom of making amulets with the names of these 3 angels to protect the babies, and various other Jewish practices are also attested to fend off threats from Lilith. A rabbi from the 1st century AD, for example, mentioned that a man should never sleep alone in a house, because Lilith could take possession of it. And this has mainly a sexual meaning, because Lilith's nocturnal visits, in this context, were used to explain events of voluntary fluid emissions, so to speak, in medieval Europe, were also attributed to the action of seductive demons, called incubi in the male case, and succubi in the female case. This would be a way to fertilize these demons, so they could reproduce. Another anti-Lilith practice, which we also know from documentation, it was the production of vessels filled with spells. We find many of these vessels with Aramaic inscriptions, mostly in the Babylon region, and one of them, quite interesting, says the following: "In the name of the Lord of Salvation, appointed in this setting for the sealing of the house of Jeonai Bar Mamai. May Lilith's evil flee from him in the name of Yahweh, the God who despises them." And other vessels like these even carry divorce formulas to detach those spirits from the home's residents. One, for example, says the following: "This is the Geth, a ritual divorce for a demon and illicit spirits and Satan, Lilith, to ban them from the whole house. Just like demons write divorce letters and hand them to their wives and do not take them back. Thus, take your divorce letter, accept your stipulated share, leave and depart from this house. Amen, 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 Selah." Well, up to this point, we've seen the origin of Lilith in ancient Mesopotamia. Her entry into Jewish culture, even being placed as Adam's first wife in some rabbinical texts, and we also saw some ritual ways to keep away the presence of Lilith. But we still need to understand how this figure, so associated with infant mortality and sexual taboos, ended up becoming an icon. It was positive later in history, and this is mainly related to Jewish feminism, a movement that was part of what is called the second wave of feminism. There in the 60s, 70s, and that continued the very long history of Bible interpretation from the rabbinic tradition, but with a very clear purpose: to combat the ideas and practices that generated oppression of women. And for that reason, the story there about a woman created from the same ground as man under equal conditions, and who refused to accept a position of submission, it was very interesting, especially interesting for this Jewish feminist movement. So much so that in 1972, a feminist theologian named Judith Plesko published a reinterpretation of the Ben Sira alphabet, in which Lilith actually was not an evil entity. According to this reinterpretation, she had simply escaped from Eden to flee from Adam's oppression. And because of that, Adam started a smear campaign, began to spread slanders of that Lilith was super promiscuous and a child eater. But in the reading of the plebs, or at least what Lilith really represented, was a strong, beautiful woman, free, and yet another victim of demonization caused by male discourse. Male, From this positive re-evaluation, even of the figure of Lilith, a Jewish feminist magazine called Lilith was even created, immunized in 76, which exists to this day. That is, there are various interpretations of this character throughout history, from the Liliths of the Sumerian texts and Isaiah's Lilith to the Liliths of the enchantment bowls, Adam's wife Lilith, the feminist Lilith, and not to mention other